hara ulu na makaaina na o tahi mai hoai, tahua ole o na kere ko. O kahi ka po, lua ka po, kolu ka po, ha ka po, o lima ka po, olu ka po, hiku ka po, malu ka po, o iwa ka po, o mita po. I holo aku hoi kai, ano aku hoi kai, pau do ta puia hoi ero, no. Mama, wano atahare nei a odo, e ora no hoi ta pai, nai tapu hare, I tana ho hare, e ora I ta makaina na, e ora I ta mahi ai, e ora I ta hawaia, e ora I na o hua ta ohana, te kanaka I ki pamai, a he mai, maloko mai, e ia ta hare nei, ua no ia o go. I te aloha o kahino e, aloha e, aloha e.
Could we give a nice round of applause to Kalama Kabigon, gave our Oli this morning. Thank you, Kalama. Aloha and welcome to Democracy by Design. My name is Brian Taniguchi. I'm chairman of the 50th anniversary of the Hawaii State Capitol Task Force. As I mentioned yesterday at the commemorative ceremony, I have a lot of aloha for this building. I came to a brand new state capitol in 1969 as a student leader to lobby for repairs to my alma mater, Roosevelt High School. In the early 1970s, I worked as an intern and staff member for Governor John Burns and was first elected to the House of Representatives in 1980. Next year will mark my 40th year as a state legislator. So I've been very fortunate to be able to work in this beautiful building for many years. I wanted to share one observation with you today. In 1992, I was majority leader in the House. On behalf of the House, I was put in charge of our relocation to the State Office Tower next door. The office tower was just an office building and totally different from the state capitol. I cannot tell you how different the two buildings are and how glad I was to return to the Capitol after the renovations. Many have not experienced this marked difference and take the open features of this building for granted. As we embark on the next 50 years of this magnificent building, I hope you will keep in mind some of the things we hope to learn today. Finally, I wanted to plant this in your mind. Many of the great buildings throughout the United States have a Friends Of group that helps to support the essence of what that building is. We have a Friends of Iolani Palace that does a tremendous job preserving and enhancing the only royal palace in the United States. I hope someone from one of you will step forward to lead such an effort for our state capitol. Thank you. Now I'd like to call on my fellow task force member. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to do one thing. Could I ask the members of the task force to please rise? They've worked really hard the last year and a half. So I'd like to call on my task force member and executive director of Historic Hawaii Foundation, Kirsten Faulkner.
Thank you, Senator Taniguchi. Senator Taniguchi has been a wonderful leader for our task force. We've been meeting for over a year, and we divided up our workload into a variety of different tasks, and you see a lot of that coming together today. This symposium, of course, yesterday's commemorative ceremony, the wonderful exhibits that are out in the front lobby here, as well as the beautiful booklet that you all received as you came in, some of the guiding tour, the map of the self-guided tour of the Capitol as well, some tremendous research into the history, the design, the architecture, the site planning, the civic center, the landscape architecture, the memorials. All of this has come to help us understand where we are and what made the state capitol the wonderful place that we enjoy today. When our group was talking about this symposium and what our goals are, what do we want to achieve today, there were a couple of things. The theme is democracy by design. And you think about that phrase, there's the design of a democratic system. What is it that brings our society together as we talk to each other, as we collectively try to solve societal issues? This is the work of legislation, this is the work of governance, but it's also the work of citizenship. So having the design of a democracy, that takes place in a physical location. So what is the design of that physical location? And how does the design of a building, a landscape, a civic center enable public engagement? How does it enable civic dialogue? How does it either help or hinder who we are as a people and as a society? So throughout the day, we're going to be exploring some of these topics. We're going to be talking about capitals. What are they? Why do we have them? What was the capital of the Hawaiian Islands and the Hawaiian Kingdom before Honolulu, before this building? What are some of the elements that go into selecting a designer, that go into selecting and designing a civic center? What are some of the ways that this building has been used as a gathering place for protests, for marches, for advocacy, for legislation, for governance? What are some of the ways that our community comes together to celebrate and to mourn? And it happens here. So we'll be looking at all of this. And as we come to the end of the day, we want to engage in what's next. Where do we go from here? What is civic engagement in the 21st century? When we asked you to register for today, we had a short survey, and I wanted to share some of the responses that came from all of you. So one of the questions was, what is your relationship to the state capitol? What is it that you engage in when you come here? So the number one answer, and you can pick more than one, so there's some duplication here, but it was a visitor to the Capitol to enjoy the art, the architecture, the memorials, the place itself. There's also the question of coming for the purpose of engaging with citizenship, to testify, to engage with your elected officials, to come for the purpose of making your voice heard. Quite a few people work in this building. It is an office building. It is where they come to work every day, and it needs to function as a workplace. There are staff members or government agencies that have responsibility for it. They need to keep it clean and make sure the lights turn on and make sure that it functions as a place. So those were some of the answers. We asked, what is your favorite feature or aspect of the building? And the top answer there was, it's an architectural metaphor for Hawaii. So we like that our capital reflects the land, the sky, the people, and what that metaphor says about the connection of the people to the land. There was also a very large contingent that talked about the open circulation, the fact that there's no doors, there's no roof. You don't feel it so much in the auditorium, but when you're upstairs in the rotunda, that you can be open to the sky and Mauka Makai and those breezes flow through. Quite a few people talked about it as a metaphor for open government. So the fact that there are no secret hallways, there are no hidden elevators, that the elected officials have to engage with their constituents. They can't lurk and scurry between their offices and the chambers. I think we're going to hear more about that from one of our speakers this afternoon. But we know that as buildings age, they need work. So what are some of the physical plant or facility issues that we would like to see prioritized? In this one, we asked people to pick priorities. What are the top 3 that need attention? And overwhelmingly, people said, take care of it, preserve its features, maintain its integrity, but take care of it. We don't want to see anything radically different, but we want it to be honored. We want it to be taken care of. That was overwhelmingly the top choice. And then there's some talk about restoring some of the lost features. Over the last 50 years, some things like the tapestries in the chambers have been lost. The ceiling tiles were just taken out a couple of years ago. And those kind of elements that were part of the original design, some of them have been lost. And then there was some talk about some of the more specific elements of the building. The reflecting pools have been a perpetual issue that people really recognize, that you have a standing body of water on top of a parking garage. And there are some issues with that. There's some cleanliness issues and some circulation issues and some drainage issues. Wouldn't it be great if we could fix that? Not to get rid of our reflecting pools, but to make them work appropriately. So that was a very high priority. And then other things were safety and security, and recognizing that we live in a different world now than it was in 1969, and we need to be aware of safety and security. We need to be aware of 21st century technologies. You see our kind of makeshift way of projecting up on this stage, but this building was not designed for PowerPoint presentations. And so looking at some of those ways that we can modernize, but again, maintain those features. And then we asked, what are your goals? What are your aspirations? What would you like to see this place become? And there were many questions, many responses to this. Many of them talked about the love that people have for coming here, for engaging with others, for just the sense of community. They want to share that with others. They would like to see this be a place of gathering, of inspiration, of community engagement. They want it to be the premier example of historic preservation in the state of Hawaii. That, of course, spoke to my heart. I didn't write that, by the way. That it inspires other jurisdictions to look to Hawaii as an example, which I thought was quite lovely. That it remain open. So again, going back to the discussion about security and safety, can you have a secure facility that remains open and transparent, and a metaphor for open democracy? And what does that look like? There's some people that talk about wanting other people to know what this place is, more citizens, more visitors, more school children. How can they come to understand and enjoy this place? Preserving, maintaining, respecting, and modernizing came through. There are a few people that talked about, let's do the offices. They're getting a little dated, I think a little stale, so looking at that, I'm sure that's someone who works in the building. Modernizing it, bringing it into the 21st century. So those were just some of the responses, and I think that was very helpful to us as we asked, what are the interests of the people who come today? So those are just some of the things we'll be talking about. We do have many sessions throughout the day. We have tried to break it into a very logical progression, but we hope that all of you enjoy this very much, and we look forward to a wonderful day together. Thank you. So with that, we will be bringing up our first speaker, who is Don Hibbard. Dr. Hibbard is the past director of the State Historic Preservation Division. He was administrator there for many years. He is an architectural historian, and he is the primary author of the booklet, Democracy by Design, that you all received as you came in today. Don is going to be talking about how this building came to be here, the site selection, the selection of the design team, and how we ended up with what we have. So Don, we'd invite you to come up. And Beth, will you change the slides, please?
Morning. I'm going to be talking today a little bit about how the Capitol came to be here. Hello? Okay, louder. I think we take for granted that the building is here now and the beauty that it has, but it was a very long process to get to this point 50 years ago. And I just want to start with this little quote I found of Thomas Jefferson's a long time ago, which I thought it's always good to keep in mind when you're in a building such as this, that design activity and political thought are indivisible. And I think very much this is the case with this building. The idea for the state capitol, people started thinking about it seriously. Well, actually, it wasn't a state capitol, just a capitol building, in 1939. At that point, the legislature passed Senate Concurrent Resolution number 8.
John, you're going to have to speak into the microphone.
Okay, better. Okay, sorry about that. Whoa. Okay. At Senate Concurrent Resolution 8 in 1939 directed the Territorial Planning Board, which had just been established in 1936, to prepare a report for the 1941 legislature. And just as a reminder for everybody, when we were a territory, the legislature only met every other year. So in 1939, they said, let's get a report for 1941. And the report was supposed to provide recommendations on a building or buildings to provide suitable housing for Hawaii's government. The report that was prepared is this. It's in the State Library if you ever want to look at it. It's all of 31 pages long, and it contains a ton of information. The board decided that the best solution for housing Hawaii's government was to have a number of buildings, not just one building. At the time, Iolani Palace right there housed the governor, the legislature, and a number of the executive offices. They suggested that over the next 10 years, the territorial government should do a program of land acquisition. They thought it would be best to keep government where it is and to build on synergy that already existed. You had the federal building right here, Honolulu Hale over here. So they said, let's build around this area. They suggested right here to save this area for the state capitol. At that time, Miller Street, as you can see, which is now the underground parking entrance, ran all the way through to Hotel Street, which is right here. In addition to buying this land, they said buy this property here, which runs to Punch Bowl, the property across the street, then down here, below Queen, the lumber yard, and the area around what we already had was the tax office. I was totally amazed that this was suggested in 1939, and even more amazed that it was actually carried out. Today you have your, the state capitol is all here. You have your Department of Health over here, the Leo Kalani building over here. They actually bought this land as well for the Kalani Moku building. Down here is the State Department of Transportation. And over here is the taxation office today. So it's rather surprising. They thought over the next 10 years they could incrementally buy the property. And unfortunately, World War II exploded on the scene, and all thoughts about building a new capital were forgotten. The report also not only decided to select where to build a capital, they also provided some information on what a capital should be and what the expectations were. And they pointed out very definitely, number one, a capital had to properly house the government. But number two, more importantly, it had to give fitting expression architecturally to the importance and dignity of government. It went on to note that in most places, this was done by a traditional means of architecture following the nation's capital. And I just throw up a number of pictures of different state capitals across the country, and I could have put more if there was more room to put on the picture. But they also noted that in addition to this traditional solution, which had used a dome primarily as a means of providing monumentality and dignity, on either side of the dome you had the legislative chambers with a rotunda in the middle. So all this they bring out, but they said, oh, but some architects are starting to change this now. Nebraska built a new capitol in 1925, which I'll show you a picture in a little bit, which was a high-rise. And also Oregon built a rather modern building. And it said these new capitals are trying new effects, supposedly to be typical of a new age. The board, however, recommended that Hawaii's capital should find a middle ground. The new Hawaii capital should be neither ultra-conservative nor ultra-modern. As this middle ground in architectural design between the traditions of the past and the desires for progressive expression is the most fertile of fields, and it was here that the greatest masterpieces have been achieved. As World War II was winding down, there was a post-war planning board formed. And in 1944, they had a meeting with the City and County Planning Commission, invited the public to come. The AIA also participated in this. And at that time, the 1941 report was revisited. Elaine Fogg of the Honolulu Advertiser reported on the meeting, and as you see, she found out that there appeared to be as many proposed civic center plans as there are bona fide residents in Honolulu. Besides the site which the territorial board had suggested, they also suggested from South Street all the way to where Ala Moana Center is now, having a Capitol Mall there along Halikuwila Street in Queen. Another suggestion was the Symphony Hall hadn't been built yet, the concert hall. Build it there and include Thomas Square and have it run all the way up to Punch Bowl, Capital District. Another one suggested where the Poly Highway is now, extend Bishop Street up as a government center all the way to School Street. And so there's all these different, another one that came up was down at the foot of Punch Bowl and South Street was Fort Armstrong. And they were saying, let's get this back from the federal government, and this would be another good spot. So all these different proposals started coming up. The planning board and the city planning commission both agreed that the site picked in 1939 or 41 was probably a little small, but to extend it to include the 2 blocks running from Richards to Punch Bowl, which you can see on this fire map. So here's Punch Bowl, here's Richards, the Palace. Take these 2 blocks and make them where the state capitol should go. I found this is a 1954 fire map, which shows you everything. The state already owns, the county, or the territory still owned this building, which was the Armory building, and this building, which was the barracks building. All the rest had to be acquired. I started to look to see what were these buildings, and these were all removed in 1965 when the Capitol was started. But I couldn't find any photos of most all of them. And I was very fortunate when I was going through the archives, the governor report, I found an appraisal report, and that had photos of it. And so I was thinking, oh yes, maybe the Historic Preservation Office does have a purpose when they say record these things. But, well, I'll show you some of the buildings that were there. The principal block was this one here, which was owned all by Schumann Carriage, pretty much. And this was Schumann Carriage. It would be what you'd call, I guess, for preservation terms, an early adaptive reuse. The tall building here is the original Central Union Church. And then it was converted in the late 20s into Schumann Carriage Auto Dealership. Here's what that building originally looked like. It was built by E.O. Smith of designed by E.O. Smith of San Francisco, who also did the Bishop Museum at that time. But as you can see, this is looking down Richard Street. They just put a new facade on the building. Further down the street at the corner, this is Hotel in Richards. They had lots there. And then running down Baratania, look this way, very much a Spanish mission style thing. This was all done in 1926. And next door was Better Brands Limited, which was a liquor warehouse running down Baratania. And this is going down Miller, also was part of Schumann Carriage. On the corner of Hotel Street and Miller Street, there was this doctor's office, which is a nice little classical building. And then the armory was that big blue blob in the middle, which was built in 1913. That one I couldn't find a picture of because it wasn't appraised. And then the barracks was also on the site. And on running down Punch Bowl, there were these small frame houses all along the road. So this is the area that they say, let's make the state capitol here. And looking back on it, I'd say, okay, replacing most of those buildings was okay by this. Nothing happens until after the war. In 1949, the state legislature appropriates $100,000 to make a design for the new Capitol building. In 1951, Public Works hires a team of architects to work on this. The team included Val Ossipoff, A.W. Heen, and then the firm of Merrill, Sims, and Rorick. This is Ken Rorick. And here they are with the model of what they came up for, which they presented to the 1953 legislature. They essentially proposed a high-rise building, a 9-story structure for the governor and all the executive offices, and then the Senate and the House would be over on this side. They would keep Iolani Barracks, which was housing the budget department at that time, and would continue in that function. Here's a rendering that was in the newspaper of that building. In deciding on a high-rise, they were thinking of efficiency, and they weren't the first people to come up with this idea. Several states already had high-rise buildings. Nebraska, which I mentioned earlier, 420 feet high. North Dakota built this 240-foot tower, which followed the same idea, essentially, which Ossipoff and those suggested, with a high-rise tower and then legislative chambers down below. And then Louisiana topped everybody at 450 feet. And so we're thinking, oh, a 9-story high-rise, not too bad. But at that time, 9-story Aloha Tower is the tallest building in the state. So this is a major change. The price tag also seemed a bit much. The architects were saying to buy the property and to build the building, it was going to cost $5.5 million. Oh no, we can't afford that much money for a Capitol building. And so there was controversy started about that. And then Dillingham, who was the head of the Ways and Means Committee in the Senate at that time, asked the law firm, or the architectural firm of Law and Wilson, to come up with a new plan. And rather than have to spend money buying land, we'll put it on Iolani Palace grounds. And I find this picture very interesting. I find a lot of times architects do this in renderings. You know that Iolani Palace is only 2 stories, 2.5. This is a 4-story building, but somehow it's smaller for the sale. But, so this is what was proposed. As you can see, they say, let's bow Hotel Street out so we have a little more grounds. Then we can put the Capitol building right here behind the palace. And so that was the proposal. And at the end of the legislative session, no decisions were made at all, and no money was spent. I find it interesting, too. It sort of makes for an interesting block in here, because all of a sudden it bows this way. And as you can see, Baratania originally bowed the other way. So it sort of squeezes it into an hourglass shape. In 1955, Governor King thinks, well, we didn't do anything in 1953. Maybe I better get a Citizens Advisory Committee to give us some advice on what can be done. And they convened just 2 weeks before the legislature met. And at that time they said, oh my God, we don't want that 9-story building. It's too flamboyant for Hawaii. We don't think a high-rise is really what we want. We want something more along the lines of the Academy of Arts. And so Merrill, Sims, and Roerich, Osipov, and Heen go back to the drawing board. And in 1956, while the legislature's out of session, they come up with this plan. Essentially, a large meeting hall with the Senate and the House chambers on either side, a reflecting pool looking out towards Iolani Palace. There was a number of problems with this. A number of people were concerned. Here you can see the way it was going to be laid out. With the meeting hall here, the reflecting pool, here's the palace, so it'll be right in line. The Senate, the House, and then governor's office over here. Keep the barracks over here, and keep the budget in there. And here's a model of that proposal. Well, that didn't meet with great response. People were saying no. Some people started calling it a grass shack capital. And the advertiser, or Star Bulletin rather, asked architects, what do you think of this new idea? They were all very quiet. And they said it wouldn't be ethical to comment on another person's work. But then the Star Bulletin wrote a letter to Frank Lloyd Wright. And Frank Lloyd Wright had no problem commenting on the building. He suggested, the proposed buildings look to me like another foolish eclecticism. The proposed tribute to Hawaii is no tribute to Hawaii. Hawaii should look forward, not backward when it builds. Organic architecture would certainly take Hawaiian culture into account, but build in modern terms the most appropriate architecture to our own time, place, and man. Hawaiian architecture, yes, but do not seek to perpetuate the old Hawaiian ensemble, but interpret Hawaiian life in terms of today's tomorrow. Needless to say, when the legislature met in 1956, or 57, excuse me, these ideas were percolating in the legislators' minds. But the design of the new Capitol was never discussed because the majority in the legislature decided the site was too small. And we have to start looking for a better site for the Capitol. This 8-acre parcel is just too small. Oh, God. Oh, Bartholomew and Associates, Walbring, did a presentation. The federal government had given us back Fort Armstrong. And he said this would be a great spot for the state capitol. And it was proposed very strongly. It was actually taking Fort Armstrong area, go all the way to Kewalo Basin was 100 acres of land. We'll just use 40 of it for the state capital. And, well, whoops, excuse me. Here's where Fort Armstrong was, and here is also part of it. We'll put some fill land in and use this in this area here, all to be the new state capitol grounds. And here's a rendering of how they saw that happening with the boulevard coming down. And this rendering appeared in the newspaper, as well as a close-up. The legislature was very much in favor of this new idea and thought this would be the perfect place for a state capitol. The waters got a little more muddied. Harold Castle of Kaneohe Ranch jumped on the bandwagon and said, hey, why pay for some of this land? I'll give you 100 acres for free on the windward side. And you can build a capitol there where Hawaii Pacific now stands. And so this was also another possibility. There was much talk, but as often happens when there's controversy and different ideas, nothing happened. At this time, this territory already owned 5.5 acres of this site. They only had another 2.5 acres to buy. But they did not take any action. Governor King was a little upset because in 1957, Congress reapportioned Hawaii. Before that time, in the Senate, there was 15 senators. That number was going to go up to 25. There was only 30 people in the House of Representatives. That's going to go up to 51. He says, there's no room now for these people. Where are we going to put the new ones? What ended up happening was they took the Armory and converted that into legislative offices and hearing rooms. Further complicating the issue, in 1959, President Eisenhower appointed a new territorial governor to Hawaii, Bill Quinn. Quinn had a new planning director, Mr. Lombardi. Mr. Lombardi said, Fort Armstrong's no good when he first came in, saying we need this for other purposes. The Harbors Department had already said, we don't want the capital down here because we need this area to expand the harbor. We're going to go to container on, off, and we need space for that. The city council also said, we don't want the capital down at Fort Armstrong. We need this area to be light industrial. We see this growing in the city and we need that use. There's much better uses for 40 acres than making a state capital on it. So this goes on and on. A report is put out for a new capital. And surprisingly enough, Lombardi had changed his mind by this time and did go with the Fort Armstrong site as the recommendation. The Downtown Improvement Association, which was very worried about the future of downtown because of Ala Center being built, was equally concerned that we don't want the capital way down there. We want it close to where our businesses are. And so they put on a very large lobbying effort as well. As a result, there seemed to be stalemate. Nothing was moving at all. Then all of a sudden, the most wonderful time of the legislative session, conference committee comes along. And all of a sudden, at a conference committee, a bill emerges that says the land, Malka, of Iolani Palace is where the capital is going to be built. A freshman senator at that time, Frank Fossey, who was very much in favor of the Fort Armstrong site, was very upset that they could do this kind of political maneuvering. And especially in the Senate where he was, they got all the neighbor island senators to vote for this location, and it passed. But they didn't appropriate any money. But Quinn still had the money left over from a couple years ago and went ahead and purchased the rest of the property here. And then he appointed a Citizens Advisory Committee and said, you decide what's going to be on the site. And most people were recommending that an architectural competition be held. However, the committee said, no, an architectural competition is going to take too much time, and also it's going to take too much money because we're going to have to pay the winners. And so instead, they said, we're just going to ask people if they'd like to design the Capitol and see who comes forward. They did put in one caveat that anybody who was an architect from outside Hawaii had to be associated with architects from Hawaii. And so with that, they just put the ad out. They got 25 responses, and then they just, in the months from late August till early October, they interviewed everyone. And as you can see from these Time magazine covers, they got a good array of respondents. This is Wallace Harrison. His firm, Harrison and Abramovitz, designed the United Nations building and also Carnegie Hall in New York City. Minoru Yamasaki, who was actually working in Hawaii at that time on Queen Emma Gardens. Edward Durrell Stone, who was working on the embassy in India at that time, and also was later will come out here and do the medical building at the UH campus in Manoa. Richard Neutra, and also William Pereira. In addition to these ones who made the cover of Time, there was a number of people that didn't make the cover, but were still fairly well known. The young I.M. Pei, who at that time was doing the East-West Center. Pietro Belushi, a very well-known regional architect in Oregon, who was at this time the dean of the School of Architecture at MIT. He was also working as an architectural critic on the East-West Center. William Worcester, who was a dean of the University of California, Berkeley. Skidmore, Owings, Merrill, out of New York City, the premier international architects in America at that time. They'll come out later and do the Mauna Kea Beach Hotel. The Taliesin Group, William Wesley Peters was representing them. Here he's looking over his father-in-law, Frank Lloyd Wright's shoulder, consulting on how they're going to do the Guggenheim Museum. Wright was dead by this time. And John Carl Warnecke, who is shown here with JFK. He's working with Kennedy on the Presidential Library, which he didn't get that commission. Pei got it instead. But so they were also all coming forward to, we'll design a Capitol for you. In addition, two men who had already designed state capitals expressed interest. W.C. Kruger, who will design the New Mexico State Capitol, and Francis Keeley, who will design the Capitol for Oregon. And so they also wish to be considered for Hawaii's capital. In addition, there were just about every architect in town. Most of them were associated with one of these national firms, but several of them went by themselves. George Wimberly and Edwin Bauer teamed up together to form a group. They were with Richard Tong, the landscape architect. Ted Vieira had a group called Kama'aina Architects, which also included Law and Wilson. And the landscape architectural firm Thompson and Thompson. And Alfred Price also had a group of very small firms all joining together to work with him. The committee met, they talked, interviewed the people. Primarily they were concerned, since there was no architects on the committee, they were concerned mainly, number one, is the person capable of delivering a good building? And number two, are they capable of seeing it built and that it will work? I think in the course, there's minutes of the meetings of the Advisory Council in the State Archives. And reading through that, you can see that the committee is getting educated more and more on what a state capital should be and what should we expect for a state capital, which I think was very important, because at the end, after they made their selection, besides recommending an architect, they also recommended that we should have an advisory committee to that architect to suggest how things should go. And so you have different architects coming forward with different ideas. And Yamasaki was one of the first ones to be interviewed because he was in town at that very moment. And he said, the capital should possess not only architectural and historical beauty, but be an image of our way of life. And this will be reiterated time and time again by all the different architects that come in, that yes, Hawaii is special. There should be something that reflects Hawaii in this state capital. Yamasaki went on and said, the building must have an enjoyment of life, must be uplifting, must give order, and through order, serenity, must be truthful, must be in scale with man. Bob Thompson made a point which was brought up several times after he made it by the committee. He said, Hawaii should have a capital which when people see it, they will say, that's the new state capital of Hawaii, not so-and-so's latest building. And it was very interesting. Several times, committee asked architects that came afterwards, who do you think will design something for Hawaii? Who do you think is going to give us a building that just reflects them? And I think the answers show where they thought the competition was. Edward Durrell Stone's name came up very often. He's going to design what he wants. And same with Yamasaki. So it was very interesting that way. Edward Durrell Stone, when he was speaking, was asked a question because he was including water features in the site. And he was asked, what about maintenance of this? A question which we're still raising today. But I think something that Stone, I thought his comment should be kept very much in mind. He said, people with fine things take care of them. Things like this add to the grace of a building. The beauty and joy they give people transcend the problem of maintenance. Pete Wimberly was also asked. He indicated that 4 different mainland firms asked to work with him, but he thought we should just be local and go that way. And when asked what the building should look like, he said, the building should have dignity, but it shouldn't be forbidding. There should be a feeling of openness and that people feel welcome. There should be use of local plants and native stone used tastefully. And Wimberly's opinion is going to become, I think, very important later on, because once the architects are finally selected and an advisory committee is selected, the governor also appoints 3 architects to serve as critics to help guide the design. And he selects Pietro Belushi from MIT, Albert Hunter, who was a major architect with the Government Services Administration in DC, and Pete Wimberly as a local representative. I also found Richard Neutra's comments very interesting and far-sighted, probably. He said, the Capitol building should be timeless. And he was emphasizing that his work is timeless, so that's why this is his pitch. He said, so in 2000, it will still be respected when all current fashions are forgotten, even by their own designers. Then he goes on and says, a government must command confidence for an indefinite period. There has to be something which will be lasting and beyond criticism. That's quite an order. To take all your money and promise you that you'll be happy ever after. In a way, everyone comes to an architect for just this purpose. The committee finally decided, the method they decided on after they did all the interviews was, everyone on the committee would write down 3 names, 3 that they were their top choices, and then they narrowed it down from there. And they said it took many votes, but eventually a consensus was reached, and the firm that was hired was John Carl Warneke and the local firm of Belt, Lamont, and Lowe. I have Lamont and Lowe. I can't find a picture of Belt on short notice. He's not on the internet. But here you can see Warneke with Jackie Kennedy and Robert Kennedy discussing the grave site for John F. Kennedy in Arlington, which he will design as well. When making their report to the governor, the chairman said there was 4 reasons why they considered this firm as the one to have the job. Number 1, the mature planning and administrative experience of Cy Lamont. And they indicated at that time Lamont was sitting on the City and County Planning Commission as well. Number 2, Warneke's willingness to establish an office in Hawaii with all planning and design performed in Honolulu. I found it very interesting. He was the only one that readily said, yes, we'll start an office here. Everybody else, well, it's not that far. If you really want it, we can do that, but we don't think it's necessary. Number 3, the complete integration of the skills of the principals and their staffs in a harmonious organization. And again, I think this played to Belt, Lamont, and Lowe because they had been in existence, although there are 3 separate firms, Belt, Collins, Lamont, Freeth, and Haynes, and then Don Lowe was a structural engineer on his own. They had been working together for 5 years on different projects. Most everybody else that came before the committee were groups that just all of a sudden formed and said, we'll work together. So this was another point the committee thought was very important. And finally, they liked Warneke's previous experience with monumental architecture. He was working in Sacramento that time on a plan for the state capitol there. He was also doing a number of buildings at Stanford and University of Berkeley. And also in Thailand. He was doing the U.S. Embassy at that time. In a letter that Bob Metcalf, who was the chair of the committee, wrote to Lamont congratulating him on getting the commission, he emphasized to him that another reason why the committee very much were in favor was Mr. Warneke's treatment of the pools surrounding the Bangkok embassy was most impressive to the committee. And this is that building, which ironically was never built. So with that, I will leave you off, and others will pick up talking about what happens next.
Thank you, Don. You know, the kind of legislative history and the sausage making that goes into any kind of selection, I think, is fascinating. And Don just hit the high points. There was even more. In the booklet, there's a discussion about some of the discussions about actually moving the new Capitol building to Maui, and that was part of the mix with the legislative debate as well. So it got very fascinating. But the story continues. So after the architects were selected, of course, then they need to get together and design and build this structure. So Belt, Lamont, and Lowe were, of course, the selected team. That architectural firm later became Architects Hawaii, which has more recently branded as AHL. We are privileged to have two principals of that firm here with us, Bettina Maynard and David Miller. They are past chair and current chair of AHL, and they're going to share with us the architectural design, the features, and some of the really special parts of what eventually became the Hawaii State Capitol. So Bettina and David.
Good morning. It's really special for us to be here with you to celebrate the 50th anniversary of our Hawaii State Capitol. Special because 2019 marks 73 years since our firm was founded, and the Hawaii State Capitol has been and remains a singularly defining element of our firm's history and culture. Neither Bettina and I were here for the Capitol's 1969 dedication, but I came pretty close. I joined our firm in 1971. 1971 was the year our founder, Cyril W. Lamont, retired and became chairman of the board of AHL. And that enabled me, as a young principal, to know Cy from then until his passing in 1992. It's a great privilege. Preparing our presentation became a long walk down memory lane for us both. For those of you who were here in the 1960s and for others of you who are history buffs, our walk recalls so many names and events which time really doesn't permit us to cover today. But if you're interested, you're welcome to view the long version of our presentation, which will be available along with Dawn's through the Hawaii State Archives. We'll put it together so that you can really see the whole continuity from beginning to end with all the names. In October 1960, the Architect Selection Committee voted unanimously to recommend Belt, Lamont, and Lowe in association with John Carl Warnke and Associates as architects for the Hawaii State Capitol. Governor Quinn agreed, and the final selection was made for the designers of the state capitol. The joint venture of Belt, Lamont, and Lowe comprised 5 architectural and engineering firms who formed an association capable of undertaking federal projects in competition with large mainland firms. Belt, Lamont, and Lowe included Belt Collins and Associates as planners, Lamont, Freeth, Haynes, and Jones as architects, Lowe and Caravalas as structural engineers, Win Nakamura as electrical engineers, and Herbert Rook as mechanical engineers. The specifications were done by Mary Alice Hutchins, a registered architect who worked with the Honolulu architectural firm of Law and Wilson as a specification writer. At that time, she was the only architect in Hawaii specializing in specification writings. Phyllis Spalding was retained for interiors, and Richard Tong provided landscape design. John Carl Warnke was a former football player at Stanford who had developed into an award-winning architect with many prominent projects. These included the tomb for John F. Kennedy, buildings at Stanford University and UC Berkeley, and at Lafayette Square.
The design work was completed in our office, the firm name at the time being Lamont, Freeth, Haynes, and Jones, under the supervision of Cy Lamont, the official project architect. Everybody called him Cy. Cy acted as project director and represented the 2 architectural firms of the association, plus the overall architectural engineering team from the beginning to the end of the work. After coming to the realization that none of the team had any previous experience in designing a state capitol, Cy Lamont, along with several representatives of the legislature and the governor's office, visited 14 capitals throughout the US, taking notes and studying the functions of the buildings. The philosophy of approach, as set forth in the Architectural Commission for the new Capitol, stated, to the sensitive and imaginative designer, the commission will be an invitation to give serious study to local conditions of climate and site, to understand and sympathize with local customer and people, and to grasp the historical meaning of the particular environment in which the new building must be sited. He will do so with a free mind without being dictated by obsolete or sterile formulae or cliches, old or new. He will avoid being either bizarre or fashionable, yet he will not fear using new techniques or new material should these constitute real advance in architectural thinking. The selected architect will think of style, not in its narrower meaning, but as a quality to be imparted to the building, a quality reflecting deep understanding of conditions and people. His directness and freshness of approach will thus have a distinguishable flavor representative of the people of Hawaii. So with a February 15th, 1961 deadline staring at them, the architects had 4 months to define the space requirements of the new capital, undertake site planning studies, develop detailed building design studies, and finally prepare plans to present to the 1961 legislature. In this effort, they were aided by the State Capitol Architect Advisory Committee. Ooh, I got one more. Hold on. The State Capitol Advisory Committee was appointed to work with the Department of Accounting and General Services in the development of the architectural program. It included an advisory panel of 3 architects who were to work with the design team to help develop and review the design. This panel was Pietro Bellusci, the Dean of Architecture at MIT, who was serving in a similar capacity in the design of the East-West Center. It was Leonard L. Hunter, who since 1934 had served as Assistant Commissioner for Design and Construction for the Federal Government Services Administration in Washington, D.C. And lastly, it was George Wimberly, who was selected by the Hawaii chapter of the AIA as their representative. A 38-member citizens committee for a state capital now was formed, representing a cross-section of Honolulu commercial interests and acting to inform the legislature of the views of the people.
Excuse me. 2 designers from Warnicki's San Francisco office came to Hawaii and worked with architects Lamont, Freeth, Haynes, and Jones for 3 months to develop the initial design. The initial design concept called for a 3-story building with 4 basic building units interlocked with 5 courtyards to give maximum openness at ground level. Hotel Street, as well as parking, was to go underground between Punchbowl and Richard Streets. The panel recommended the building be made smaller and expressed concern that the plan provided limited public access to legislative offices and hearing rooms, and wanted a design that invited interaction between the citizenry and the elected officials. Other early designs included a sky palace that had tall columns 50 or 60 feet high with floating legislative chambers way up in the sky. Another entailed several temple-like structures. Many of the designs included reoccurring elements such as inviting open courtyard and symphonic features such as volcanic-shaped chambers. By mid-January 1961, after many schemes and 27 models, 2 basic ideas had emerged as the best to further develop, known as the Heiau and Lanai schemes. The Heiau design placed most of the building and its functions underground with only a lava rock single-story defining a courtyard at street level. All of the offices were on 1 floor, creating a massive spread-out structure. A vaulted arcade monumentally rose approximately 30 feet into the air to accentuate the courtyard, but with virtually no purpose except as an expression of dignity, nobility, and aspiration. The Lanai design, the 13th design by the architects, presented a 5-story, open-type structure with 60-foot tall columns rising from a large reflecting pool and focused on a 180-foot wide central courtyard. The building was centered on the large banyan tree on the Iolani Palace grounds, offsetting the Capitol from the palace so as not to overwhelm the historic building. Concern over groundwater, seepage, and other technical difficulties of the Heiau design, coupled with this proposal's high construction cost, led the advisory committee to recommend the Lanai scheme for development. A model and progress report of the Great Lanai proposal was submitted to the legislature on February 21st, 1961. The House leadership found the design aesthetically pleasing and functionally satisfactory, but the cost estimate of $24 million, which is $7 million for the site preparation and $17 million for the building, was hard to accept. So the design was modified to reduce costs by reducing the size of both the central courtyard and the size of the building. Also, the undergrounding of Hotel Street was eliminated, and the relocating of the archives and former archives building was also eliminated. The changes enabled the cost construction of $14,547,800, which still included the straightening of Beretania Street and the relocation of Iolani Barracks building. In response to the legislative concerns, the advisory committee made over 40 public presentations on the plan, including to the outer islands. Governor Quinn gave full support to the revised plan, stating it was designed by eminent architects and reviewed by distinguished critics. It has beauty with function and will be a proud and lasting symbol of our heritage and to our modern sovereignty as a state of the Union. With Senator Inouye and Reverend Akaka also expressing support, the City Council passed a resolution calling for the immediate start of construction on the Capitol in the Civic Center.
Although the 1961 legislature adjourned without appropriating any funds for the Capitol, it did approve $1 million for land acquisition of properties adjoining the Capitol site. The following year, despite Governor Quinn surprisingly not including any monies in his budget proposal, the 1962 legislature approved $518,000 for the preparation of the working drawings. Warnicke and Associates, architects Ty Sutton and Don Fairweather, assisted with the refinement process of the chosen design and the completion of the construction documents. John Carl Warnicke also paid visits to the office during the final design process. Cy Lemon was project manager, and Frank Haynes served as the assistant project manager. Lighting expert Richard Kelly was retained to work with the architects on the Capitol design. He was recommended by Cy Lemon. Kelly was lighting consultant for the Dallas Airport in Washington, D.C., and the Seagram Building and Lincoln Center for Performing Arts in New York City. During the design process, the office of Lemon, Fries, Haynes, and Jones moved to their new office at the new First National Bank building, which was later known as the First Hawaiian Bank building, which they had also designed. An open house was held during which guests could inspect the progress of design work proceeding on the new state capitol. The firm took the 15th floor of the 17-story building, which replaced the Aloha Tower as the tallest building in Hawaii. Final plans were submitted by Belt, Lemon, and Lowe in June of 1946. I say this every time. It was before I was born. $1.6 million was appropriated that year to start the state capitol to cover initial construction and relocation of various government offices affected by the construction. The Capitol building was the largest architectural job ever undertaken in Hawaii at that time. The construction documents included 500 drawings and 350 pages of specifications. A team of about 40 architects and engineers worked to complete the plans. The final building is a 5-story structure, 225 feet wide by 315 feet long. The Senate and the House of Representatives chambers are at basement level. The building entry is an open court. The rotunda and public entry to the spectators' galleries in each chamber create the feeling of being accessible to the public. Senate offices are on the second floor. House offices are on the third floor. Additional House offices and the Attorney General and Department of Budget and Finance are on the fourth floor, and the governor and lieutenant governor's offices are on the fifth floor. There's also a 75,000 square foot lanai, of which 35,000 are undercover. Parking is located underground.
Hawaii State Capitol was the first in the United States to be designed in a modern architectural style, devoid of historical domes or related exterior elements. The exterior design includes symbolism such as the number 8, representing the 8 main Hawaiian islands through 8 columns on the front and back of the building, and the 8 panels on the doors to the governor's and lieutenant governor's chambers. The 2 legislative chambers symbolize the volcanoes from which the islands are born. The 40 columns, each 60 foot high, represent palm trees. The Capitol building is surrounded by water, representing the ocean, with the Capitol itself, an island therein, symbolic of Hawaii. The fire of the arching chamber walls represent Hawaii's volcanoes. The architect stated, "The volcanic metaphor may have been even deeper significance than we intended. We often joke that things do blow up in the House and Senate from time to time." The building was the first state capitol to center around an open-air rotunda, domed by blue sky. The theme, said the architects, would be an open invitation for the citizen to enter his capital and participate in the business of government. The design of the House and Senate chambers incorporated curved surfaces very difficult to make construction drawings of. So they called in mathematics professor Christopher Gregory from University of Hawaii to help them. Excuse me. Interior designer Phyllis Spalding worked with Countess Elsie Gozzi, owner of the world-famous Fortuny fabric factory in Italy, to produce fabrics for use in the Capitol. Fortuny fabrics were widely exhibited in museums throughout the world, known for their trend-setting combinations of color and design. For the Capitol, the Fortuny adopted ancient tapa patterns onto their fabrics, including a wana, sea urchin, and a kalai hui, terracotta design. Ms. Spalding had photographed a book of ancient tapa patterns that she found in the Bishop Museum and sent the photos to Venice for Mrs. Gozzi to study. About 11,000 yards of fabric was used, and when the order was complete, the pattern was never used again. Other finishes also incorporated Hawaiian art, culture, and materials. The carpet in the governor's reception room had a 13-foot diameter crowned flower lei design. A koa table with a calabash and draped leis were placed at the center of the lei. The room also contained 2 large kahilis, ancient symbols of Hawaiian royalty. Inside the governor's office was a massive koa desk and a state seal suspended in front of drapes with a sea wave pattern. In each chamber, a large tapestry was hung between each giant movable chandelier. Senate chambers were the colors of the sea and sky, blue tints, while the House contained the reds and browns of the earth. Much of the interior woodwork, including the governor's large koa desk, the legislator's desk, and the casework, was completed by a company called Commercial Consultants and Contractors, Inc., a local Hawaiian company who provided on-the-job training for tradesmen to help provide a high level of craftsmanship. The company employed the only woman cabinet making in the industry in Hawaii. These women were accepted members of the Hawaii Carpenters Local 745.
Here are some quotes by architects and other team members. Although the Capitol is not as intimate as the palace, it is very alive. One of the things we wanted was to open it up, to make the chambers open arms to welcome the public. You can look in from the courtyard and see the legislatures conducting their business. From the upper stories, you can look down and see the Senate President and House Speaker, which makes it a very open kind of operation. It opens up lawmaking to all people. Another quote, "The three major structures are the Capitol, the Palace, and the banyan tree at the Palace grounds. The banyan tree is a very important part of the architecture. It eases the transition from the monarchical past to the democratic present and future, as represented by the royal palace and the state capitol. And lastly, one reason for keeping the capital off-center with the palace is that it would have overwhelmed the palace. It's more out of respect for the palace than anything else." Oops, sorry. Designer John Carl Warnecke said, "The Hawaii Capitol had to visually symbolize the island's heritage, yet function and work on a practical basis as the 50th state seat of government. Both must be treated with equal importance." He also said, "Although the Capitol is being built for the future, it must relate to the past. The building embodies the essence of Hawaii. With its noble scale, it captures the dignity of all the people of Hawaii, their rich past, and their high hopes for the future. With its symmetry and order, it is a symbol of government. With its openness to the land, the water, and the sky, the building symbolizes the beauty of Hawaii. Throughout time, man doesn't change. Certain truths and relationships are always the same. Feelings for hunger, beauty, color, love. Man's relationship to physical object gives him a feeling of nobility. Certain classic proportions have been worked out since its earliest times. When a building gets too big, man loses his relationship. He is more apt to sense nobility besides the Parthenon than beneath a New York skyscraper. My first concern with Hawaii Capitol building was the basic relationship between man and noble scale. And then I wanted it open to express the Hawaiian way of life, its hospitality and wide horizons. Because the state is an island, the capital is surrounded by water. This shallow moat will have a dark bottom to reflect the slender white columns. The great colonnade supports a working floor which houses both the Senate and the House. On the ground floor, one enters by walking over water towards a vista of park and trees. It's as though all this were a great banyan tree with a central trunk reaching skyward and tentacles of columns touching the ground. Cy Lemon said, "It was felt that the design should be a symbol of our geographical location, our way of life and environment. A great deal of research was made into Hawaiian history, legends, and customs. We felt something which was simple and dignified could still retain the monumental character and freshness of the Hawaiian concept." The inspiration for the 20 soaring columns came from two sources: the aerial roots of the banyan trees and the vaulted canopy of palm fronds. The exterior form of the chambers is suggested by the distant view of Punch Bowl, and the building standing in the great pool is symbolic of our isolation as an island. Most architects only have the opportunity to come in at one stage along the way in a building like this. We've been with it all the way. The fact that we have the chance to develop the state capitol makes us doubly fortunate.
With money appropriated in 1964 for the start of construction, the state notified the occupants leasing space in the building to vacate. Buildings moved or removed for the site to make room for the Capitol were Iolani Barracks, moved to the palace grounds, The armory and buildings behind it facing Beretania, demolished. Schumann Carriage, also demolished, except that Schumann Carriage building was retained temporarily to house legislative offices that had been utilizing the armory, which then was later demolished. Better Brands, Hawaiian Government Employees Association building, demolished. Houses, as Don mentioned, between Punch Bowl Street and Barracks, demolished. Universal Motors, later demolished. And Paradise of the Pacific building, also demolished. All existing trees were preserved. The Ilani Barracks building was constructed during the reign of Kamehameha V for the Royal Household Guard, which included the band. The moving of the barracks was quite contentious. Many were upset about it being moved and would rather have had the Capitol constructed at another site so the barracks could stay in its original location. But in the end, the barracks room, But in the end, the barracks building was disassembled beginning in late 1964 and rebuilt block by block on the palace grounds. Various ideas for its use, including a proposed wax museum of figures from Hawaiian history. It was instead restored for use as a public museum to house, display, and interpret collection relating to the history of the Royal Guard and Band, and to provide quarters for the present guard. Pardon me again. In 1965, the legislature provided general obligation bond issues totaling $12,685,000 for construction of the Capitol and completing of the relocation and reconstruction of Iolani Barracks. Bids were opened on September 16, 1965. 5 contractors that bid on the job were Ben Hayashi, Hirano Brothers, Reed and Martin International, Dell E. Webb of Los Angeles, and the joint venture of Hawaiian Dredging E. Black and Pacific Construction. Reed and Martin International were the low bidder at $17,554,099. The bids included the construction of the building, furnishings, and landscaping. This was nearly $2 million more than the comptroller expected and was available. Some portions of the bid varied widely. The cost listed for the desks for the legislature chambers and offices, Reed Martin had priced at $43,000, while the cost listed on the Hawaiian E.E. Black consortium was $371,000. Obviously, they didn't use the same desk maker. Groundbreaking took place on November 11, 1965. Governor Burns, House Speaker Elmer Carvalho, Senator Mitsuyuki Kido, Lieutenant Governor William Richardson, and Reverend Abraham Akaka used the ancient Hawaiian agricultural tool o'o to dig into the earth, marking the site for the new building. Interior decorator Phyllis Spalding and Fortune fabric owner Countess Elsie Gotti toured the Capitol with Cy Lamont and Don Fairweather in September of 1966. Dressed to go to lunch at the Pacific Club, which they later did, Spalding and Mrs. Gotti were the first women to tour the partly completed Capitol. They met at the Red Barred Cottage on the construction site, which was used as an office by Belt, Lamont & Lowe and Warneke. After donning aluminum hard hats, the group set out onto the muddy site. The workmen appeared to be intrigued by the visitation of the ladies in white gloves and high-heeled pumps who prowled around the building. The building foundation was completed in early 1966 and work began on the 40 columns. A large crane was purchased especially for the project. It cost $150,000 and the freight bill was $12,000 to ship it from the mainland. It was the second largest crane on Oahu at that time. It was identified that additional parking would be required, so a second underground parking garage was added and designed while construction continued.
Governor Burns nearly daily checked out progress on the Capitol construction during his walk from his home at Washington Place to his office in the Iolani Palace. During construction, Governor Burns personally reviewed all change orders in order to control any cost increases on the project. Plans were changed in 1966 to raise the height of the ceiling over top floor executive chambers by 5 feet, from 10 feet to 15 feet. This added 3 to 4 months of time to complete the Capitol. The work on the underground garage was accelerated to compensate for that delay. Another change was the enlargement of the Senate's offices and equipping them with sinks and closets at their insistence. A renovation to provide a sauna for the senators was in the works for a while, which became a subject of complaint for many citizens, feeling that it was an extravagant expense. Although it was projected to be greatly refreshing, the public outcry at the $1,700 expense caused the project to eventually be canceled. It was reported at this time that, surprisingly, nothing valuable or unusual had been found in the ground during the moving of the barracks and the digging for the foundation of the Capitol. Looking at the partially completed building, Honolulu Star Bulletin columnist John Charlot wrote, "Once completed, what sort of frame will our new government prove to be for our present and future rulers? Will the mana, the spiritual aura that insistently haunts the old frame buildings, ever learn to dwell inside this gigantic cement grove?" The building was occupied as portions were completed. The legislature was able to convene for the first time at the new Capitol on January 15 of 1968, but then recessed until February 19 so that more work could be completed. Workers scrambled to get the building as ready as possible for when the legislature reconvened in February. The last of the stone paving in the courtyard and the glass in the chamber doors was installed shortly before dark. The second and third floor offices were made available while work continued on the chambers. A blessing was conducted on February 21st prior to the initial building use. After being photographed for the last time in their palace chambers, the legislators went on the steps of the palace and made the walk from the palace to the new Capitol. The executive offices, the governor and the lieutenant governor, remained at the palace until the 5th floor of the building was completed. With the moving of the legislators in February, the official seat of Hawaii government transferred from the palace to the Capitol building. And while the legislators were in session, the contractor focused work on the upper 2 floors of the building. Following completion of the budget session, the legislatures moved out of the building again in April to allow the contractor full access in order to finish the building. The air conditioning system reportedly worked a little too well when the building was first used, and many government members donned overcoats, with one even threatening to install his own fireplace or maybe a hibachi. The system, which was a mammoth 900-ton unit, pumped 9,000 gallons of air per minute and cost $1.5 million. It was controlled by thermostats located in 140 major air cooling zones of the building. It was designed such that there was no ugly cooling tower on top of the building. The 2 massive replicas of the state seal were installed on the Mauka and the Makai sides of the building on March 2nd of 1969.
The grand opening of the building was on March 15, 1969, 10 years after the enactment of the statehood bill. Invitations had been sent to at least 500 government, military, business, and civic leaders to participate. An estimated 3,500 people were in attendance. Master of Ceremonies Keenan Kim, State Comptroller, told the guests, "The majesty of this building speaks for itself. Its openness invites the sun, moon, stars, winds and rain, clouds and the birds. Our seat of government has moved from America's only royal palace to America's only open capital." The Right Reverend Monsignor Charles Kekumanu, pastor of Our Lady of Peace, invoked blessings not only on this magnificent structure, but on those who will govern there. Following a standing ovation, Governor Burns spoke of the timelessness of the dedication. 10 years to the week since Congress approved Hawaiian statehood, and expressed appreciation to all who were responsible for making the ceremony possible. He said, "I am especially grateful also to the many hundreds of workers, carpenters, plumbers, as their unofficial foreman." He was the unofficial foreman because he walked the site virtually every day. "I have personal knowledge of how hard they worked on this job. This magnificent structure symbolizes all we hold dear. The openness of its design reflects the openness of our society." A time capsule was inserted into the cornerstone and closed up by Governor Burns, House Speaker Tadao Beppu, and Senate President David McClung. The time capsule was recently opened, and the contents, as many of you know, were and are available for display. On March 16, 1969, Reed and Martin held a formal dinner party for 850 guests on the 5th floor of the Capitol. Cocktails were served prior to dinner on the 4th floor. The party was attended by the legislators, Governor Burns, U.S. Senator Danny Inouye, Chief Justice William Richardson, State Comptroller Keenan Kim, Clifton Terry Jr., then President of Bank of Hawaii, Mrs. Robert L. Stevenson, and members of the architectural and engineering teams that worked on the project. Oh yeah, okay. That's still me, sorry about that. Impressions by children often capture the most basic and simple parts of our reactions. A group of 4th graders visiting the Capitol not long after the opening of the building were quoted as saying, "It was so big. We went up so many stairs. And the governor's office was big and beautiful, and it was high, too. I wish I was governor." Another was impressed with the reflecting pool, except there were papers floating in it. Many were impressed by the governor's intriguing built-in desk switches that controlled the drapes and the lighting, while others commented that the rug is a nice color. A Fine Arts Advisory Committee, which convened in 1964, was assigned with selecting artwork for the Capitol with a budget of $420,000. Member John Carl Warneke stated, "Major consideration should be given in the region because art is a reflection of time and place. But the election should not be rigidly confined to local artists." Artists selected to provide major works of fine art in the Capitol included Otto Peony from New York to provide light sculptures for the Senate and House chambers. Those represented the sun and the moon. Tadashu Sato of Lahaina to provide a floor mosaic for the center of the ground floor open court. And Ruth Adele Anderson of Honolulu to provide a wall hanging and wall hangings behind the Speaker's rostrum in the House chamber, representing earth colors, and the Senate chamber, representing sea and sky.
The Honolulu chapter of the American Institute of Architects presented the Progressive Architecture Award to Belt, Lemon, and Lowe, who in association with John Carl Warneke and Associates designed the State Capitol building. That was in 1962. Progressive Architecture magazine's public use citation also was awarded to Belt, Lemon, Lowe, and John Carl Warneke. The citation was given for freshness of design idea, quality and scale of the building, and its stature as an architectural symbol. Architectural Record referred to it as an exceptionally handsome building and a most unusual Capitol. And since Hawaii is both the newest and the only island state among the United States, a unique design seems right and fitting for so unique a place. The most unusual feature of the building is its openness, a quality it derives as much or more from the open character of Hawaiian society as from the tropical climate. By being individual and contemporary, the new Capitol gives Hawaii something that its old buildings in their borrowed styles did not offer: a building inspired by and in response to the islands themselves. Architectural Forum applauded the building in 1961 as the first major state government building entrusted to a leading modern architect. The magazine saw the building as a symbol which reflects the tropical splendor of the islands, and found that symbolism to be obvious, effective, and very handsome. They felt the Capitol should dispel the fear that a modernist could only produce a functional administrative plant. All marveled at the design's ability to convey symbolic meaning in a modern vocabulary, fulfilling the 1939 vision of the Territorial Planning Board to find that elusive middle ground in architectural design between the traditions of the past and the desire for progressive expression.
A name for the new Capitol was being discussed as early as 1966. Suggestions included Hale Aupuni Government House, Hale Moku'aina State House, Kaupena, a place where good is gathered together, Ke Kapitala, the capital, and Ho'omalu, to give protection or to make peace. Also, Hale Kanawai, House of Laws, Lanakila, Victory, and Hale Aha, House of Council. In 1968, it was decided that all state office buildings would be given names after the ali'i, except for the Capitol. It was agreed that the state Capitol would be the proper title for the building. From both of us, mahalo.
I'd like to thank Bettina and David, and we have a few moments for questions. And actually, Don, if you'd like to come up as well, we can direct questions to any of our first two sessions. And I'm going to start with one. Bettina, you mentioned there was a change order to raise the ceiling on the 5th floor for the governors. And I've heard maybe a rumor that you can confirm or deny that was at the bequest of Mrs. Jacqueline Kennedy, who is visiting Carl Warnicki. Do you have any insights in whether that is true or not?
I don't.
Maybe I'm just spreading rumors, but of course Mr. Warnicki was the designer of President Kennedy's tomb, and evidently she was touring the building and said that the ceiling was too low and it needed to be raised. Don, do you know if that's true or not?
I've never checked on it, but I've heard that also.
All right, I guess we'll have to find out.
You know, all three of us were little kids when this was happening, so we really didn't know answers to a lot of these things. Right? Right, Don?
Yes.
We were not little kids when that happened.
Don, a question for you. You know, for many years there were also rumors that Iolani Palace was being proposed for actual demolition to make space for the parking garage. Is there any truth to that rumor?
I'm not sure about the demolition, but there were some, I think it was more stories being put out to try and encourage the preservation of the building, so they had to say it was being threatened. But yes, there was stories about it, but I don't think it was very serious.
Maybe one of those, everyone who came to view the exhibit had an idea, and that might have been one that was just sort of floating out there, perhaps. Questions from our audience? Nanette. And I'll try to repeat these, so keep them short, too.
Through the course of the development of the project, several kahu were brought in to do blessings and such, but I didn't see any reference to any Native Hawaiian cultural advisors that were actually at the table putting input into cultural aspects.
Thank you, Nanette. So the question is whether there were Native Hawaiian cultural advisors or kahu who were part of the advisory committee and to advise on the cultural aspects.
I don't know what their capacity was, but there were several people from different Hawaiian societies and the civic clubs that were on the advisory committees.
Thank you, Don. Third row.
Hi, good morning. Thank you very much for your presentations this morning. I have a particular fascination with the moving of Iolani Barracks. Who were you folks? I know it wasn't you two, were you, especially not you. You're too young. Who actually was responsible? Was it your architectural firm? Who did the movement? And how was it in fact moved? Did they change the foundation? Were improvements made to help it stay alive? And also, I think it's quite remarkable that they didn't bulldoze it. So cheers to the folks that kept that building alive.
All right, I will recap before Don answers. So the question was for the relocation of the Halikoa Barracks from its original site to where it is now on Iolani Palace grounds, how that was accomplished, who oversaw it, why did they decide to do that, and was it changed in the process? Don, would you like to take that one?
Well, the contractors who built the building were responsible for the moving of the building too, of the Iolani Barracks. That was part of their contract.
But I thought it was built in 1913.
That was the armory.
Armory.
Yeah, the barracks were much older, from Kamehameha V.
Help me with what year that would
They
be?
s-
The barracks were built in what year?
1871.
So the same contractors from 18...
No, the one contractors for the state capitol building.
Oh, the actual contracting company was the one that moved it.
Yes, and I was told, and I don't think, yeah, is Glenn here? No, he's not here. No, but Glenn told me it was rather strange because they were very careful when they were taking it all apart, and I had all it in a pile, but then they moved that pile to Iolani Palace grounds. Originally, when they took it apart, all the top stones were on the top of the pile. But when they moved the pile, all the top stones ended up on the bottom. And so they built the barracks upside down the second time. And so to rectify that, because all of a sudden all the large built stones were on top, and they plastered it and scored it to look like the stone. But the stone's all underneath.
Where is the best place to learn this story?
Talk to Glenn.
So one more question. Captain McMurrow, you had a question?
Were there any structural problems? Have there been structural problems besides the panel that fell off?
Have there been any structural problems with the building, either, I guess, at the time it was built or since then?
I'll just mention that to my knowledge, there have not been, because we have been involved in a lot of repair and maintenance over the years on the Capitol. And I don't remember now, since joining the firm in '71, that I've heard anything about any structural issues.
Please join me in thanking all of our morning panelists. So we will take a 15-minute break and reconvene here at 11 o'clock. Thank you.